All right, welcome to Back and Forth with Blue Ridge Wealth Planners. I'm John Vandergriff. I'm joined by the ever so famous Zach Hill of Blue Ridge Wealth / Remedy Coffee. So again, check it out.
Thank you.
Good place.
Yeah.
Still haven't added wide mochas since the last time we talked, but working on him, grinding it down.
Yeah, you might get me one day, but not for a while.
Did you catch my coffee pun there?
Grinding it down.
Yeah. So today, obviously, like the show is, we're going to talk back and forth over different topics, and again, try to keep things relevant here, where we're looking at the CARES Act and the stimulus plan that surrounds that, with obviously everything that's happening with coronavirus and COVID-19. If we want to get technical, but just the impacts of things moving forward, and again, talking about pros of this CARES Act and also cons or potential negative impacts that we see down the pike. So always defer to my Mr. Positive here for today, at least in this, Mr. Zach. So go ahead with our positive focus here on.
Okay. Yeah. So Congress actually passed the CARES Act with incredible speed, which we haven't seen before. And so I think the first thing that's so positive about this is that no matter what the stimulus package was, it got in the hands of the consumers and businesses very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I think that rapid pass through Congress just allowed the money to get into hands of the people that needed it very quickly. And so the next thing you need to talk about is what money was that, what was actually in the package. And so the first thing that I think was a huge help was the actual stimulus checks. That's what most people saw. They saw it hit their bank account if you had direct deposit within just a matter of a few weeks. And so that was just so overwhelmingly positive for a lot of people who lost their jobs. We saw 25 million people over a 4-week span actually file for unemployment. And so for them to be filing for unemployment and then actually have a $1,200 stimulus check hit their bank account, that allows them to pay for food and rent and basic necessities when they had their incomes drop to zero in such a short amount of time. And so that happening so quickly, and then something that was just as simple as direct cash payments, really helped a lot of people out when they needed it most, because it was so fast and so needed.
Well, I think, too, the interesting thing, you brought that out that I hadn't even thought of. The fact that Washington was able to agree on something with speed
right.
is encouraging. Hopefully it doesn't take, thousands of deaths to make that happen again, but it may.
We go 4 years without agreeing to anything, and then in 4 days you can pass a stimulus bill.
Yeah, so just depends on the motivation there. So,
right.
So yeah, I mean, positive checks.
Yeah. And I think the next thing that we need to talk about is the protections that they put in there for small businesses, and particularly the service industry is where they were trying to target, because the majority of these job losses, I think I saw a stat that it was 67% of the job losses that we saw in unemployment came from actual service industry workers that we just had to cut because all the businesses closed. Right. So all the jobs were lost pretty rapidly, and they went to file for unemployment. And then so the government did two things to kind of help out these service industry workers. The first was to help out the businesses through the payroll protection program, which provides essentially 2.5 months of payroll to businesses that were affected by the virus. And then the next part was adding unemployment insurance for those who had filed for unemployment. So the government tried to do programs for both the businesses and the employees who were laid off. And so those programs, again, they happened pretty quickly. Congress has had to fund the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, again because it ran out of money so quickly. A lot of people have seen their unemployments delayed because the states were so overwhelmed. So those programs were obviously needed, and they happened, again, so quickly that we've seen businesses who are now able to pay their employees if they were able to get the PPP, or we've seen individuals who are able to meet their obligations, their monthly rent obligation or something like that, just because they're getting that additional unemployment benefit.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, from you have a unique perspective, obviously, working here, in a small business, but having a small business yourself, and seeing some of the benefit of the struggles of the coffee shop with all this happening that a lot of people have had, it's not just, but seeing some relief there to where, both from a staffing standpoint, you've got some people that are able to get some assistance during this time, but also, have some payroll protection for yourself, I think is a great thing as well.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I think helping on both sides of the equation there was so important, was because in the past 2008 we came in and bailed out a lot of corporations, but there really wasn't much help for the individual. And so this time we really tried to take both sides of it. So I think that helps. And like you said, tend to be biased towards the service industry workers just because I've seen that hit directly and personally, but through a lot of people that I know. So that does color my view a little bit.
And I've seen a lot of opinions of people that talk about, how drastically different, you can say each recession type period is, but when you compare this to 2008, it's different from the kind of big corporate level being affected most, and the small businesses really, in some cases, remaining unchanged. To you almost have the complete opposite here, where Starbucks is full, if they're keeping their drive-through open, but yet you get a local shop that's really forced to not work, So I think that's an interesting thing, and it's also interesting just when you look at the dynamics of the economy, like you had referred to earlier with the speed of it, because I was looking at the amount of trading days that it took for the market itself to drop 30%, and this time was 22 trading days, and you compare that to like 250 in 08.
Right, yeah. In 2008, we didn't know the recession had happened until after it already happened.
Right.
And here we saw in real time, we saw businesses closing. And I remember it was the Sunday before St. Patrick's Day, I was meeting with my employees. They were really worried. They said, what are we going to do? I said, well, we're just going to wait and ride it out. And then 3 or 4 days later, Tennessee had issued a safer at home order.
Right.
And so we went from not really having any idea to 3 days later having to shut down a significant portion of the economy. And that hit the stock market instantaneously. It hit unemployment. I think the previous peak for weekly unemployment claims was around 600,000. Yeah. And then the first week we were hitting 4 million, 10 million, 6 million. We were in the millions, so we went from 600,000 to the million. So that was just crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of what, we talked about the motivation that Washington had, and I think just a lot of the reactions that a lot of people have had is the speed, and we talk about how, everything moves faster now with, kind of our society wanting things on a very immediate pace. Well, I don't think they wanted this quite as fast,
right. Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things where we've got to look at it and say, as we move forward, obviously we've got some things that are positive in this. And again, not everything's completely positive. But I do think when you have kind of an unprecedented stoppage or pause of our economy, you have to do something.
Right.
Especially when you're forcing people not to work.
You're not even giving them a choice. Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting to see as things progress how obviously there are other things happening, in our economy and in the global market other than just the COVID-19 with oil prices. And I think that gets kind of swept under the rug. Not a lot of people talk about it. But just seeing how quickly can the markets respond once everybody's allowed to do some things,
Right.
So, I think I don't have a lot of arguments there. I'll kind of, take a different approach to maybe some of those, as we progress. But, as we look here, the reality is when we face unprecedented times, every decision is going to have a positive and a negative. And again, I think sometimes the worst thing that can happen is not doing anything, and unfortunately for a lot of people right now, because of the speed, because of the pausing, because of all this, it's really forced a lot of people to have inaction when it comes to decisions that may be good decisions to make, because we've talked to a lot of people during this time of wise decisions you can make when it comes to tax planning or even investment planning and I think so many people have kind of insulated themselves, from a mandate from the government as far as staying home, but also just use that as an excuse not to make some decisions when it comes to maybe things that could be positive or negative for their life. And so, as we look at this, obviously trying to weigh the impact of some of these things both now and in the future is kind of what we'll look at today. But, as we look, we'll take a break here, looking at the kind of negative implications of some of the stimulus plan moving forward. But as we look at this, very positive things to see in a time where, some people, that are kind of doomsdayers may not ever see any positive that can come from it. But I think, getting money in the hands of people who need it the most in a very rapid pace is a great thing that can happen. And so what we'll do is look at the impacts of that coming up next.
Are you nearing the age of retirement? Is your 401k not looking the way you'd hoped all those years ago? Retirement is supposed to be a time to relax, a time to live. Here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, we strive to provide that service and opportunity. We can help you form a plan that will maintain and grow your retirement savings so that you can achieve what you envisioned when you originally set out on this journey. To see where you sit and what you can do to stand again, visit planforeverything.com. That's planforeverything.com. Blue Ridge Wealth Planners. Let us plan for everything so you don't have to.
All right, back and forth with Blue Ridge Wealth Planners. Again, I'm John. This is Zach. We're going to be talking and, again, helping people process through the pros and cons of the CARES Act and the stimulus plan and package that came along with that. And so Zach did a very good job pointing out some of the positives of this. And obviously, if you've had a check that hit your bank account, you probably count that as a very positive thing because we didn't even hit on this. When you look at that check, not only is it a check that is not taxable, but I think it also processes as a tax credit
It does,
for the next year. So you kind of get a double impact of that dollar. So again, a positive impact all around there. No taxes and also a tax credit for next year or for next time you file taxes. So again, we talk about that, but now we're going to turn a little negative, and looking at some of the implications of this when it comes to both kind of problems that we see now, but also problems that we see in the future. And so as we look at, one area of this that I think we'll kind of balance, and talk over some different sides of is the fact that it was about $1 trillion more than they planned on the initial CARES Act being. But
just a slight rounding error there.
Yeah, but it's one where some of the areas of that were not funded enough, and then some were so good for people that it really didn't make sense. And so, as we look at the unemployment piece of that, the opportunity for some people to have the ability to make such a large number, I think, is what has kind of driven that unemployment number up so high. For a lot of part-time people, for us, it really didn't make a lot of financial sense if we had part-time people that could get way more out of this unemployment program than they could even in the jobs they were working. Not only it made financial sense for them to get into it, but it's also going to make it a lot harder to entice some of those people to leave it,
Right. As quickly as we saw the unemployment rate spike up, it might not come down that fast because people are not going to be incentivized.
Right. And I think, as we look at this, it's something where, we've seen this, happen where not just with unemployment, but also with just the stoppage of working, and if you had to kind of furlough your employees or make it to where you weren't just consistently doing kind of a similar payroll to what you normally had, you have a jockeying of position of now people are using maybe what's happening to try to, make their situation a little easier for their work and putting a little bit more strain on the small businesses to, like, if this is the situation I have, what are you going to add to me that you didn't have before? So you now have just the lack of good employee, also the have to incentivize the employees more to come back.
Right.
So it's kind of a double negative there where, you've got people that, again, if you're paid a pretty substantial sum to do nothing, what's the incentive to do something else?
Right, and I think in Tennessee, the unemployment insurance on an annual basis, now you only get it for 4 months, I think, but on an annual basis, that was $40,000 a year on unemployment. That's a lot of money to not,
Right, and obviously it depends on like where you're at, because like $600 a week, in New York City is different than Knoxville, Tennessee. So,
right, and in Tennessee, cost of living is so low, it's such a beneficial thing because they just said $600 no matter where you are.
Right. So some people, that was a negative. Gosh, I was making way more than that in the job that I had, and I wasn't able to get it. But then not having some kind of cost of living adjustment on it, I think made it disproportionate in disproportionate areas.
Which is unfortunate because in New York, they needed it the most. New York was the hardest hit city in the world, and they're getting the same unemployment benefits that those in Tennessee are, and New York might not be able to go back for 6 or 8 months, depending on where you are.
Right.
So
yeah, so definitely, the unweighting of it, because even inside of the unemployment conversation, having obviously a tremendous opportunity here locally, but then in other places not having enough money,
Right.
that kind of negative weighting. But then looking at from a wider perspective, stimulus plan wide, kind of the unemployment situation being a little sweeter pot than maybe the amount of money that they threw into the PPP.
Right.
And I'll let you kind of elaborate on your negative experience there. But
yeah, that was very negative. So I mean, I think the PPP. This is where you get into the actual back and forth. Had very good intentions, was set up very quickly, was funded very quickly. There was a whole new loan application invented within a matter of days. That's pretty impressive. But the downside is that they didn't really think about how many people were actually going to access this or the regulations that they needed to put in place for companies that could access it.
Right.
And so my experience has so far been overwhelmingly negative with the PPP.
Right.
I feel my bank didn't have the application up and ready. Bankers were really confused. The banks were on the hook for giving out the loans, and then they had to just believe the SBA was going to forgive them, but nobody really had all the plan stipulations that we didn't know what was going to be in the plan. We started out knowing that it was going to be for payroll, utilities, and rent, and then the SBA said it has to be at least 75% for payroll. But if you've laid off all your employees, you don't have any payroll. So there's a lot of confusion there. And so that confusion led to a really prolonged application process on the front end. Mm-hmm. And then the SBA ran out of funding within 10 days.
Yeah.
And so you ran out of funding for this program, and then they funded it again. And then now it looks like they're going to run out of funding again pretty quickly. So I got my application in within 24 hours of the loan portal going live, and my bank still hasn't processed my application.
Yeah.
Banks were just kind of prioritizing who they wanted to. It was a really confusing time. So from that perspective, it was a negative process for what was supposed to be a very positive program.
And I think, too, you have some negative impact there when it comes to, like, let's say you have a small business and you don't have a lot of business dealings with a bank. Like you said, it was almost one where you were incentivized to have more leverage with the bank because they kind of favored some over others, and so if you had a very good business relationship with them, you may have gotten kind of to the front of the line, so to speak, if you put your application in.
And we didn't have a loan with our bank because we got a better interest rate somewhere else, and that was 5 years ago maybe. And so we had this loan that we've just been paying off, and never did I ever think that it would come back to bite us that we didn't have our checking account at the same place we have our loan.
Right.
But in this scenario, it really did.
Yeah. So again, the positives of some of these, obviously there's some negatives depending on which position you're sitting in, and maybe some of those small businesses weren't able to get access to funds that really would be used for what the PPP plan was intentioned for, but unfortunately didn't get a chance to, and may not get a chance depending on, again, how many rounds of funding they're going to throw at this. And so again, I think the most overwhelmingly negative thing is something that we've talked a lot about in our office, but I don't think a lot of people are talking about, and that is just the impact of throwing a big pot of money that we're not obligating people to pay back yet into the national debt that we have, and just assuming that there's not going to be any impact, or at least no one's talking about the impact of the fact that, right now, on average, our budget deficit is growing by about $1 trillion a year, and then we take $2.2 trillion plus whatever stimulus monies come after that and add it to this national debt that is growing by, I don't know if it's quite millions of dollars a day, but it's
got to
be increasing.
We spent $2 trillion in one day. So
right. But the national clock, as you can go look at it online. So again, as we look at this now more than ever, I think it's giving us more and more incentive to recommend that people make some decisions on taxes, because we have, I talked about this on a separate radio show, but we kind of have a perfect storm right now of opportunity for people, with markets at a depressed rate, with taxes at a lower percentage, and with a government mounting a debt that is going to have to force people to pay it off at some point. You've got an opportunity now where you may be able to pay lower taxes than you'll ever get again.
Right.
And so taking advantage of that opportunity is something that we want to help people with, but also get the message out as widespread as we can so that people can see the opportunity and do something about it. Because, a lot of people talk about, and again, we've, had this conversation before, but, people will be concerned that, oh, what happens if the government changes their mind? Like we're talking about Roth IRA conversions from tax-deferred positions to Roths, and they say, well, what if the government goes back and says, Roths don't exist anymore, that all this money's taxable? And again, you have to lean on kind of the historical narrative that we have of the government, number one, being elected officials, and number two, not being big on changing the rules of already passed things.
Right.
Like they could make it where, moving forward after some point, a Roth doesn't exist, but I don't think they'll ever go back. And so, and retroactively make tax-free money taxable. Now,
right.
Could they? Yeah. I mean, they kind of have the keys and can do whatever they want while they're in office. But as we look at this, I think making the decision to do Roth conversions now is an opportunity that for the cost that it costs us tax-wise, we may never get again. And especially, looking at our position, with that debt probably being in a position of nobody knows when they're going to actually care about paying it off.
Right. But
that coming in the future at some point, the wise decision we can make is put as much money in our tax-free positions as we're allowed to, and whether that's, Roth 401ks if your income's too high, backdoor Roth conversions for existing tax deferreds, or, using properly structured life insurance to be able to build a tax-free bucket and get those taxes paid today so that you don't have to worry about the tax implications of that. And, as some people will say, insulate these accounts from the government, because, again,
right.
As the government can pass an act that gives $2 trillion to people, they could also pass an act that makes taxes double from where they are now. And, again, I'm not of the opinion that long-term it doesn't need to happen. Like, we need to get back to a more balanced budget, but it's just one where, again, it's going to happen, and when it happens, nobody's going to like it, and they're going to probably wish that they could go back to this time frame and say, hey, I wish that I would have paid taxes on money knowing what taxes are now.
Yeah, and we already know the tax rate is going to go up when the Tax Cut and Jobs Act expires in a few years. Mm-hmm. So we know that that's going to happen. It's just we knew that 6 months ago, and now we've added a lot to the debt. So now that makes it seem like it's even more likely. And
again, it's one where, if there's a changing of hands in Washington before 2025 when that's set to expire, it could go away quicker, Right. So, I mean, that's the incentive that we have right now to make a call. And again, if you can convert things at a lower price with where markets are, whenever it comes back up, you get a tax-free gain on it if you play by the rules. So again, we want to be in a position where we make good, wise decisions with our money. And again, some of the negatives that we have positive implications. But as we look at it long term, we've got to realize that there's going to come a day where somebody's going to stick their hand out and expect a bill to be paid. And it may be China, and it may be somebody else, but guess what? It's going to it may be us.
Yeah.
Right.
We hold a lot of the debt. Yeah.
But somebody's going to have to pay that debt, and it's not like we're just going to push a reset button and start over. Where everybody's just going to say forgive each other's debts and zero out. That's a bargaining chip that unfortunately we're going to have our hand forced, and we're not going to be happy paying a majority of our check to the government as opposed to tax rates as they exist right now. So again, where we look at that with, being in two different positions, if you're still working, obviously the contributions that you make, trying to make it as tax efficient as possible. But while you're in, transitioning to retirement and you don't add anything else to the bucket, it becomes even more important for that because you don't have any means to add to, if taxes get worse. You're just like, This is what I got, and I got to make it work. So again, as we look at that, that's the pros and cons as we look at it today. Thank you for listening to us. And again, if you've got any more feedback, we've got info at Blue Ridge Wealth you can reach out to with questions, comments. And again, we look forward to another episode where we'll talk over a different topic and go back and forth.
Investment advisory services offered through Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Madison Avenue Securities, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, MAS, and Blue Ridge Wealth Planners are not affiliated companies.